My name is Emily. I'm one of the co-founders of Chain Security and the head of sales. So I'm not technical, and so then I brought someone more technical than me, Kenan, who's also a partner at Chain Security and a senior blockchain security engineer. Today we're going to be talking about hacks, of course. You know, we're a security company. And specifically, we'd like to talk about the ZK Sync hack, the Bybit hack, and also a potential trend of hacks not being smart contract hacks anymore, but actually being kind of more Web2 type of attacks, more phishing, social engineering. And in the end, the key compromise is kind of a Web2 attack, right? It's just stealing information from a person. So this is kind of what we're going to be talking about today with the help of Kenan. So let's get started. Kenan, can you tell us kind of briefly what happened with the ZK Sync hack?
So first of all, hello guys. With the ZK Sync hack, essentially tokens were minted by an attacker which took over a safe wallet, and then he was able to execute privileged transactions. And the main reason for the attack was essentially a loss of keys. However this now happened is still unclear, I think. And probably it was phishing or something else. And essentially what they did is they took this safe wallet, they initiated the transaction, they used the airdrop contracts to mint the remainder tokens that ZK Sync allowed to mint by governance. They minted it to their own address and they essentially profited, I think, by $5 million. So that's essentially it. It was a setup with multisig governing those contracts. And this multisig wasn't really a multisig, it was a one out of one safe wallet. So it was one address that controlled the funds, so it was quite easy to pull off. If you have the keys to one address, you can still control this multisig. So it was essentially not too much like crazy effort to put in. Of course, you need to get the private keys. However, what's interesting is actually also that this address hasn't been really active, so it hasn't probably used any protocols. So there seems like it's also hard to phish this address because it hasn't interacted too much with the chain. So yeah, I think that's it.
So it sounds like would have been difficult to know about this address, would have been difficult to target the specific attack. Could it have been an inside job?
Well, it can always be an inside job, right? You never know, but I expect people to do, in their companies, to do some KYC on their employees, typically. So even if it's an inside job, you can trace back who set up this wallet internally, who decided to be the signer, and then it's like one person. So you can easily follow their tracks, but you can also then investigate to see if this person actually did something. But apparently, I think from the ZK Sync blog or one X post, they actually, I think, did this investigation, and it came forth apparently that it wasn't an inside job. But of course, it could have been an inside job. We've seen so many rugs, we've seen so many weird things in this industry, so it's possible. But in this case, personally, I doubt it.
And how come these tokens were minted? Was ZK Sync waiting for another stage of the airdrop, or how come these were not minted?
So the typical procedure is that you set up like these miracle trees, and then you can prove basically that you have an allocation. And what this contract essentially did is you, as a user, were eligible, you were notified on X, then you could check your wallet whether you're eligible, and then you have to claim. And the claim period, I think, started in 2024, and it ended somewhere in January 2025 or February. And for some reason, like, people did not claim. Maybe they don't use ZK Sync anymore, or they don't use crypto anymore. Maybe they lost too much money and stopped using everything. So some people just didn't claim their tokens, and eventually, once the deadline ended, nobody could mint tokens besides this particular this particular governance address that had the right to mint everything that was unminted by the users that should have been minting something.
And was there, so basically, like January, February, we realized that the deadline has passed for people to mint these tokens. Was there something ZK Sync could have done with these tokens, or were these tokens basically never going to be minted unless the hacker came in?
Those tokens could have been minted by this particular address, but this particular employee was leaving ZK Sync in September, I think, but I'm not sure about that anymore. So nobody had control over this address. So that was one of the first mistakes, probably, to not check whether you still have control over important contracts. So they didn't have the control over the contract, so that wasn't good when this employee was leaving. For example, in banking, I have friends in banking, of course, in Zurich, but typically you know who has what privileges for customer accounts and so on. So this makes also sense for multi-sig contracts and multi-sig signers that you keep track. This is everything what this person can do. So once this person leaves our company, we revoke those rights.
And here, I don't know if it was a multi-sig more than a mono-sig, right? I mean, not really best practices either.
Yes, for some reason, they, in this case, didn't set it up. I checked on-chain, like their other multi-sigs or their safe wallets. In those cases, I think they have a 4 out of 7, which is quite acceptable, but for the airdrop contracts, something probably went wrong in the processes, and this highlights the importance of processes, that we have checklists that we follow, we validate each other, not that we don't trust each other, but still it's better to validate. But there could have been other measures taken, because there is also the ZK Sync token contract, and in this contract you can define access control, which is then governed by the actual multi-sig of the Security Council of ZK Sync. And this.
Wait, the Security Council, is that a real thing that exists, or you say there should be a Security Council?
I think there exists one. It's they were the ones also negotiating with the attacker. So, and also they can assign roles, particularly on the token contract, and they could have just revoked the role of the minter contract, that this minter contract can be hacked but cannot mint, right? That could have been a possibility if they never intended to do anything with the remaining tokens. So there is a pending access control, which is also not cleaned up. So it's also for smart contracts in that regard important that sometimes you need to clean up your state, you need to check what you have, what privileges certain addresses have, and then just filter through and revoke those accesses.
I'd love to hear more about kind of also the process of negotiating with the hacker, recovering the funds and so on. But I think now you already started on the kind of best practices and lessons learned. So there is one, of course, not having a one signer, but having more signers. And so checking also who has these privileges with the smart contracts and kind of trying to keep that up to date. What are some other lessons learned that we could share with the audience here based on this?
I think the most important thing is to keep, once you set something up, don't trust your former self. Also validate yourself, because this was probably just a simple mistake. Monitor your contracts, which is really important.
How? How should you monitor your contracts?
Some people use custom tooling, some people write their own scripts, some people use existing platforms. There is also platforms that you can define also smart contracts that under certain conditions you can actually trigger certain actions so that something is prevented. If they see a transaction happening, they try to front run it. So there is a few things, monitoring tools out there, but of course, I think that's the most important thing. You have to have a good setup, which is a good multi-sig. Best practice is typically that you use separate EOAs, so that for each multi-sig, which is important that you typically have a separate EOA, which you don't use to interact with anything, because you don't want to get phished on this particular address. And then what you would want to do is optimally you would isolate, maybe if it's a very important multisig, you can isolate, have a separate machine also to just do transactions. So that's also a possibility. It depends on what you're doing and the level of funds, of course, that are at risk by a mistake. So there should be proper risk evaluation, as other industries do. So we should always keep an eye open for possible attack vectors and the funds at risk and the importance of the given governance contracts.
Don't trust yourself, don't trust your colleagues. Have a multisig with different DOAs, and if you have a lot of funds, having an isolated machine to interact with it. Sounds good. Now, they recovered the funds. How does that work to recover the funds? Who negotiates with hackers? What is the process for this? And how do they first get in touch? How does that work?
Well, should I speak from personal experience? No, just joking.
We're white hats only, thank you.
Of course, no. Yeah, typically I'm not too much involved in this, of course, but how it looks like is when such an emergency happens, typically a war room is formed. You ask trusted parties to join your war room.
Like who, like SEAL?
Yes, they would be, I think, they're very trusted individuals that have a reputation of being morally good, if we can define this in this area, that they have been consistent in their behavior, these individuals. So you would contact SEAL, which is a go-to option. You would contact other partners of yours. You would contact maybe individuals that you know are very trustworthy. And then people first try to figure out what happened. They try to block everything that they can block. Sometimes nothing can be blocked, and at some point you try to reach out to the hacker, and then you try to communicate on X on different platforms, and typically they also send an on-chain message, which is basically just zero transfer or a call with no value with some string encoded there so that the attacker can decode. Depending on the attacker's preferences, he will use something.
He or she.
Yeah, he or she, of course. But the attacker then can decipher and or just simply read and decide whether they want to do it or not. And maybe the reason to do it is that often when you do certain things, you leave still traces. The internet is not at all anonymous. You've maybe check the documentation of a platform that tracks your IP address. You didn't use like very sophisticated anonymization, so you maybe just used your regular IP to read the docs of this protocol, and maybe the IP address was locked. So, and then you can trace it back to the IP, which is not easy at all to do, but oftentimes you can on-chain figure out which address funded your address, or which address funded the attacker's address. So you follow the funds, and then you at some point see transfer from a centralized exchange if they didn't do it properly in that regard, and then you can collaborate with the exchange to figure out who initiated this transfer. Oftentimes this also leads to interesting results where you can find out who the attacker is, and of course if you show the attacker to some degree that you are on his toes, that puts a lot of pressure on them because they're criminals in that sense, and you're offering them then the chance with your messages, which you send oftentimes multiple times, right, just to ensure that you reach them. You put pressure on them, and eventually they return, hopefully, the funds, which is not always the case because North Korea doesn't care about your threats because, you don't have any legislation with them. So it doesn't always work. Sometimes people think also that they're smarter than other people, but there's always some guy that is smarter that can figure out who you are. But sometimes there is not, so they are also sometimes willing to take the risk.
And so sometimes you can kind of turn this into like, oh, you found an exploit, that's great, you can keep 10% as a bounty and give us 90%. Is that what happened in this case, or did they return 100% of the funds?
I think they returned, essentially what they did, they minted the ZK token, they swapped to ETH, if I recall correctly. They bridged to different chains to some degree, I think. And this indicates that they initially planned to keep the funds for themselves, but maybe they saw the offer of taking the funds legally, which of course depends again on the legislation where you're at. And then they returned the ETH according to the terms and conditions that were laid out by ZK Sync. Probably they had some consulting with experts there. So I think my personal belief is they probably wanted to keep the funds and then realized the other thing is a better deal.
And how do they know? I mean, can't ZK Sync, they get the funds back and then they still sue them and then they still do the investigation? I mean, it's not because you give part of it back that, what if I rob a bank and then I'm like, oh, actually I'm giving the money back, I'm still gonna go to prison, right? How does that work?
There, I'm no expert to be honest, but I don't know. It is hard because again, it's always different legislations where you're operating at. So probably in the US, if you do something in the US, it's different than when you do it in Dubai, and it's then different than when you do it in Australia. So it's very hard to say what legislation applies, to be honest. So probably you could still sue them, but if you as a protocol would sue them, it would set a precedent where you show that you don't keep your promises. On one hand, it's very bad marketing. On the other hand, it's actually also good for your protocol that you recover all funds. So it's a difficult decision to make, probably in terms of legal, also marketing, and reputation.
Thank you, very interesting. Should we cover more things on ZK Sync, or is it okay to move to Bybit?
I think we can move on.
Do you guys have some questions about the ZK Sync hack before we move to Bybit? I think we talked about it for a very long time. Okay, so the Bybit hack, what happened?
Well, 1.4 or 5 billion were stolen, which is incredible. This is probably also the biggest heist in human history. I assume so. I've never heard of something of this size. I think the Ronin hack was previously the biggest one, but I'm not sure. So what happened is, it was a very sophisticated attack, a state-sponsored attack by North Korea, by the Lazarus Group, which is their experts. And they did essentially hack, not directly also Bybit, but they did a regular Web2 attack where they took over the AWS instance of Safe Wallet. And then they did some things there to show that on the front end that you're signing something, but actually you'll be signing something differently. And
I'm sorry, the attack vector was through AWS?
I think one developer installed a malicious Docker container, so he was phished by a website, I think it was Get Stock Price something, and he installed something which he shouldn't have installed. And ultimately this led to his machine being compromised. Eventually this led then to their instance being compromised, which then led to the signers of Bybit seeing wrong stuff on the safe global front end, which then led to them signing stuff, which they did not double check, so they did blind signing, and this led them to 1.5 billion lost.
Okay, so first it was a safe developer that was phished, then that allowed them, the Lazarus Group, to have this impact on the safe infrastructure, which then had the impact on Bybit. And what do you mean when you say the blind sign? I mean, what was the message that was shown? Was there something different, or was it? I mean, because you say the interface of safe was also attacked, right? Exploited.
Yes, exactly. The interface of safe was exploited. So that's again this trust assumption that people have. What do you trust? We trust the safe front end to some degree, but this isn't sufficient. So if safe was to turn malicious, very unlikely. They could again present you wrong data, which you would then, of course, not like the stuff that you see on your hardware wallet looks differently. But if you just look at the safe website, then you see something, and then you just press the button, and everything goes boom. That's the essential thing. So you see actually what you want, what they want you to see, what you expected to see on the website, but actually what you see then on your hardware wallet is something else.
And so, but then it wasn't really a fault of Bybit, right? If they saw what they expected to see, what should they have done to prevent this on the Bybit level? Should they or could they?
Yes, that's a very good question. They could have. This is exactly that you should remove the trust of the safe wallet website. You should use it as it is meant to be, but there is other tools which can validate your safe transactions for you. There is a few ones that recently popped up or became more popular. You can write your own tooling, which is always good, so you trust your own code the most probably. But if you use multiple tools to check whether something is correctly displayed on the safe website, and then you're already making good progress. So you should use multiple tools to validate your transactions. You should also check what you are actually signing. So the thing that you see on your hardware wallet, this is the thing that you're signing. You should really understand what this is and what it means. So you should then check this against the front end.
Okay, so you need to have different tools. Are there some tools that you see people using that are trusted, some kind of off-the-shelf tool that people could use here?
Yes, I think Yearn has their own safe tooling, Yearn Finance. So on their GitHub, I don't know what it is, or I haven't checked it out. There is also from, what is this tag? It's PCA Versace on X. He has his own tool, which is very cool. It's very minimal. It just uses Bash, I think, and that's all that it needs. There is also one from OpenZeppelin, Safe Utils, which can help you to identify like inconsistencies. So you should probably just use all of them or write your own tooling just to ensure that, because the likelihood of one thing getting attacked is, let's say, 10%, but then the likelihood of both getting attacked just decreases, and then the likelihood of three things that you use being attacked at once for you specifically, it's incredibly low. So it's then it's a crazy attack that you cannot prevent. But in general, you should use multiple tools to not have this single point of failure.
But I mean, okay, for a 1.5 billion transaction, that's maybe something else. But for people who like have to manage payroll with crypto, who have to do a lot of transactions, pay their suppliers, they have to make 10 transactions a day. Is it realistic to use these three tools, or I mean, how can you do it in a way that also matches your business requirements?
Okay, that's a very good question. Oftentimes, what I would also personally do is, for important stuff that is not immediate, right? Sometimes these payments, you can organize them one day earlier, you can put them behind a time lock. So you send the transaction and then you recheck later on, or somebody else cross-checks what you put in, so you have a 24-hour delay of being actually able to execute your transaction. That always helps, because you can also, if you did not do simulations beforehand, you can still do, while the transaction is pending, you can still do your simulations, but you should simulate. There is also tooling, like Tenderly, for example, that you can use, that you should do. You should probably use, depending on the severity, probably use two things to validate that no front end has been compromised. But if it's small transactions around $1 or $10, if it's just for coffee or something, yeah, you just risk it, right? But for payroll, it depends on how much is controlled by this address, because what the Bybit wallet did is actually prepared a transaction that wasn't, I think, too big, and then if you sign the wrong thing, you can just simply drain everything. So it's very hard to say what the best business practices is, but there is, I think, also this website which offers checklists how to multisig, I think, or multisig how to, I'm not sure anymore, but people will find it somehow with how to multisig. And there is checklists for that depending on the severity. And I would probably say when you see your transaction, validate that it matches at least what you see on the front end.
Interesting. So going back to how could we have prevented this? So I think on the Bybit side, we kind of covered it. Now on the safe side, what could they have done to prevent kind of their attack vector?
Difficult to say. I think regular checks, regular trainings, separate machines they could have used, but that's hard to say.
Thank you. How are we on time? You let us know if we need to stop talking, because I think we're going to be talking for 2 hours here. I have a lot of questions. And guys, feel free if you have any questions, you can raise your hand. I'm very happy to have also your participation and discuss the topics you're interested in. Okay, yeah, so for safe, very difficult. Yeah, it's phishing, right? So it's training, it's a lot of different things. It's compartmentalization. Yeah, so that's quite difficult. And I think it's also very interesting what you said, that even if you make a small transaction, you have to consider it, or you can have to consider the risk level, basically everything that's in the wallet. And I think that's a very good point. Now, $1.5 billion. Where is this money? How do we even spend $1.5 billion? How do you launder $1.5 billion? This is crazy. How do you do that?
I would know how to spend it, but how to launder it, I'm no expert. But I can, like from observations, how they do it is they distribute it to multiple addresses, they start mixing the funds. And
with Tornado Cash? Or?
Yeah, I don't know if they, in this instance, use Tornado Cash, because eventually it also gets very hard, right, to launder, because you have such a big sum of money, and the security of such mixers is only to some degree, or this privacy is somewhat only guaranteed if you use it very carefully. If you're the one that deposited 100 million, right, and you withdraw the next day 100 million, it's very likely that you're this particular person. It's incredibly likely, because nobody deposits 100 million, so it's a very slow process. You shuffle around, but very cool people online still figure out where those funds went, and that's an incredible skill to have. And they follow then the money, they probably do some analysis on the likelihoods which addresses are involved, and yeah, I don't think it's a simple process. They have very elaborate schemes where they also used multiple chains. They started using multiple chains and some other chains which made basically all of their profit from trades on their chains for the tokens. So yeah, it's very hard to do, but somehow they manage, but people still find out.
Do we have any hopes to recover part of these funds? Or like you said, it's North Korea, they don't care about investigations, you can't pressure them, so they're not going to give it back?
I don't think you can. Probably only if you can exercise a really big amount of pressure, but putting pressure on somebody that has nukes, right? It's not easy. Or you do a counter-attack. That's also, of course, like you can try to attack them, but they're very isolated, so probably it's also hard to attack them in that regard. But I'm not sure about that. But I wouldn't expect the funds to be recovered.
And so right away, the narrative was that it was the North Koreans. How do we know it was them? Can we know for sure actually that it's them?
I think Zach XPT on X, he's like probably one of the most famous on-chain sleuths. He figured out, he was able to connect how he tracked the funds, and he was able to connect one address, I think, to another hack. So the funds of another hack went to partially to one address, and he was able to connect that both hack initiators transferred funds to one address, so he was able to connect that. It's actually proof that it's the North Koreans.
Interesting. I think I'm out of questions for the Bybit hack. Is there something else you'd like to say? Maybe some more concrete, best practices that people could use to avoid this, or did we already cover it?
I think we covered most, so I would recommend checking out the website that I mentioned and that was shown up for a second. I would also, in general, recommend that maybe not all signers of a multisig go to a conference. It's the same as with your private keys, right? If you catch 5 people and you have all 5 private keys, then again you're screwed. Be very cautious, be very paranoid. Don't trust anyone, don't trust yourself, and be as paranoid as possible. If you can, do as much as you can. It's worth the time to ensure that everything is as safe as possible. Of course, at some point somebody will get hacked again, but then we can at least say that we tried.
Sounds like fun. Do we have any questions from the audience about the Bybit hack? Otherwise, we would move on to another topic. And the last one, I promise. All right. Just quickly. So on Twitter, I see more and more people talking about hacks, about phishing, about social engineering, and really these more Web2 type of attacks. And I wonder if there's maybe a trend of more attacks like this, or maybe I'm just more sensitive to it, or maybe people feel more free to talk about it. What do you think it is?
I think it's not a trend, but it feels like smart contracts are getting more secure in general. There's fewer smart contract attacks, but also I think the North Koreans realize that it's just simpler to do these kind of attacks. Or maybe it's not, but they maybe realize that. But I also have this general feeling that people are communicating much more about it. They're sharing their experiences, which is really nice, and I feel like we've seen now so many attacks, so many high-impact attacks over the last few years, that people finally woke up, realizing that yes, everything is cool, we have cool smart contracts, they are very secure, but they're finally woken up to realize, hey, there is still the old side of things which we also need to do on the standards that we require, which we currently probably still don't do.
Interesting. Thank you so much. I think we're going to be done. I think we're out of time. One last thing, final words you want to leave the audience with?
Be paranoid and thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. Have a nice day.